been touched or have seen or have been some part of robotics in this Charlotte area. I know many of you, are aware of my team or have seen my team. There's some folks in the room who have even made parts for my teams. And it's one way that I like to give back to a program that I have near and dear to my heart. I would not have become an engineer without it. And I also do custom robotic solutions kind of on the side. So I use SOLIDWORKS every day, just as users do, not just working at a reseller. I use SOLIDWORKS for fun. I use SOLIDWORKS to make a living. I just love the software and I use it. So all that experience, all that stuff I'm talking about, I have a set of tips and tricks that I don't want to live without. And quite honestly, I don't think you should have to live without them either. And so I have put together the things that I am most surprised that users don't know about SOLIDWORKS as I'm going through and I'm teaching, as I'm going through and working with other users, teaching other folks how to do this. Obviously, I'm teaching middle school and high school students how to use SOLIDWORKS. They break it in a whole nother set of different ways and challenges that you wouldn't imagine. So I am honestly just going to start off with my absolute #1 tip. And I'm just going to ask the question, by show of hands, who in the room uses their S key? If every hand isn't up, this is your #1. So I'm going to jump into SOLIDWORKS, and I'm going to talk about the joys of the S key. Now, if you're not using the S key, you absolutely should be. If you want the #1 trick to get you faster at SOLIDWORKS, it is the S key. And I'm hoping this projector doesn't screw me up here. There we are. So, when you click on a plane or anything inside of SOLIDWORKS, 90% of what you want to do next is on that mouse tooltip, right? The other 10% you can customize, right? You can right-click, you can hit customize, you can drag whatever command you want onto that toolbar. Well, if I'm going into a sketch, it's usually the first thing you do before you create something. I use my S key. That brings all of my tools directly to my mouse. Now, if that alone isn't enough to convince you, right? If I start sketching using my S key, I can also put other tools on my S key that aren't standard. I can customize my S key. You'll notice that I actually have my entire features ribbon and my entire sheet metal ribbon on this S key. So if I want to jump straight into a boss extrude, I just did a boss extrude and I didn't touch the ribbon. I didn't sketch touching the ribbon. I didn't make a feature touching the ribbon. And in a minute, I'll show you how to also add dimensions and everything else without touching the ribbon. I'm keeping everything that I'm using right there on top of the mouse. It might not seem like a lot, but it adds up. Not having to navigate through different tabs, different ribbons. The only reason I even have my ribbon up there is because I teach SOLIDWORKS and I want everybody to know where the buttons are in case that's what you love. If you are a ribbon kind of person, then there they are. But this is by far the fastest tip. Now, the S key is not just that shortcut bar that has all of your tooltips on it. If I go into a sketch here and I, use my S key, I add another rectangle or something like that. Did you also know the S key is also the search command too? All you need to know is what the command is called. Let's say I need to do a split line, and I don't necessarily know where that command is. There's 850 commands in the software. I don't know where all of them are anymore because I'm spoiled because I have the S key. So as long as I know what it's called, the S key will also search for you and tell you, and it'll put a big red arrow up there, as long as your mouse isn't on a slanted podium. It'll show you where that command is located, and it's telling me that it's actually under curves. And so if I want to do a split line command, and I want to project on that face and create a split line, I can. So my S key is the best shortcut on the keyboard for all commands. It is also the search bar for all commands inside of the software. And you can be in a feature, you can be in a drawing, you can be in a sketch, whatever environment you're in, the S key changes. So let me talk about that a little bit more. How do you set it up? How do you use it? On your shortcuts bars, right, you'll see this pop up somewhere. This is your S key. It changes. It's sensitive to the environment you're in. Sketch, drawing, assembly, or part. So I obviously do a lot of simulation, so I have my simulation tools on my S key. If I don't want them on there, I can just take them off. If I want to put them back, I can just go to my toolbars or even flyouts toolbars. I can find my simulation toolbar, and I can drag it and drop it in there. And I can reorient these and move them around however I want. That is to say, it really just depends on what I'm doing that day, but my S key changes about maybe once a week. I do much more sheet metal and features, so I just prefer to have those toolbars on there. The things that make you really, really fast, in my opinion, is if you actually put your flyout toolbar for features on the S key, because then you don't even have to touch the ribbon. And it's sensitive. If I go into a sketch, I have my features that are typically grayed out, right? Unless I create something on this. Now all the features that I can do are there. Well, that means that if I do this on my S key, only the features I can actually do are there. So it's filtering through all the grayed out commands as well. If you already knew about the S key, maybe I'll tell you something about it you didn't know. This is 2021 that I'm using now. In 2022, it actually takes this search bar up here and it puts it on the S key. Like physically on that mouse button, and then you can search for any command you want on top of the S key. So this is by far the quickest and most powerful shortcut that I could teach you. If you're not using this, break your habit, whatever you're doing today, and start implementing the S key into your day-to-day. It is definitely worth it. And you guys can't see it, but my whole right screen is covered by a webinar pane, so I'm just going to roll with it. Quickest access to all search commands, right? All sketch commands, all feature commands, any command. If you're looking for it, start with the S key. It's also the search button, so it doubles up. And you can make it your own. You can make it exactly how you want, and then you can do a copy settings wizard, put it on a thumb drive, stick it in your bag, and always have it with you. That way, if you reinstall SOLIDWORKS, go to someone else's machine, you can do that copy settings wizard and throw it back on there. I don't need the ribbon. Who needs it? Right next to the S key is another one that they started using about 2 years ago with conjunction with this thing called breadcrumbs, and it's called the D key. So let's go into SOLIDWORKS and explore that a little bit. I'm just going to pull up an assembly, a random assembly I have going on here. Looks like I was doing simulation last. So when you click on something in SOLIDWORKS, I remember saying that 90% of what you want to do next in an assembly is right there. I can go into a sketch, I can open the part, I can open the drawing for that part, etc., etc. Well, what many people actually haven't realized if you've been using SOLIDWORKS, especially for a long time, is that up here in the top left, there's these things called breadcrumbs that appeared, right? Like 2017, 2018, around that era. Well, they've been there for a few years now, but if you hit the D key, it'll snap the breadcrumbs from that top left corner to your mouse. So the D key brings the breadcrumbs to you, but every year since the breadcrumbs have come out, they've added a tiny little bit more to this. So let's say I clicked on this upper arm for this assembly. I clicked on that face. Do I want to click on the face, the feature that was used to create that, the sketch that was used to create that feature? Am I talking about the solid body, the part file, or the subassembly that that component is part of? Ah, now I start to see the value in it. If you do this in a really, really large assembly, like let's say you have 7 layers deep on your assembly tree and you have thousands of components, that allows you to click on any single part and filter right there on the screen with the D key exactly what you want. In addition, all of the mates to this component are now visible because they just added this feature about a year ago, which means you can now get to the concentric, the coincident, or the other concentric command that was used to mate that component. So this does act as an awesome quick filter so that you can see this is the top level assembly, this is the subassembly that that's a part of. So let's say I want to select the subassembly in the screen. Now I can also get the origin and the planes for that. What is that good for? Mating. It means you can just literally click on something. You don't have to go over here and filter through the tree any longer to find things so that you can mate to it. You can just select the thing in question and hit the D key. Now, if you're in a sketch, it works similarly, just that it is there to speed you up. So everybody knows about the confirmation corner in the top right corner. So if I create a sketch and I want to confirm that sketch, I can hit the D key and it snaps the confirmation corner from there to the mouse. So the S and the D key are right next to each other on the keyboard for that reason. They are in conjunction the two buttons that make you go the fastest when combined together. And that's why that one made my list. All right, let's go back over here to SOLIDWORKS. So, number one, it summons the confirmation corner when you're in a sketch or in any command. If you're mating, if you're moving stuff around, if you're creating a sweep, a boss extrude, a loft, whatever, you can summon the confirmation corner with the D key. If you're in an assembly environment, right, it changes. It snaps all the breadcrumbs to your mouse and allows you to summon this really awesome filter. So this is the best filter for just clicking on stuff inside of SOLIDWORKS if you use it. This next one, while it might not seem like a crazy big deal, to me it absolutely is a time saver. Your settings. I'm sure you've been frustrated by some CAD settings at least once in your life. How many of you walk up to a seat of SOLIDWORKS for the first time and the first thing you do is invert the mouse wheel? If you learned on AutoCAD, it's probably almost every time. You'll invert the mouse wheel first. So settings mean everything. Well, I do have a set of settings that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to tell you what they do. But really, just these three alone speed me up so much that their importance cannot be overstated. And the thing I find is that they are not checked on by default. And in my opinion, they should be. So if you do nothing else in your settings, inside of Sketch, on your system settings, everyone should go home and change to these three things. I'll show you where they are and what they do. First, if I go into my settings, you're going to want to go to Sketch, since these are the most important ones that I find. And you might have noticed when I start a new sketch on a plane, my screen snaps normal to. That is the top option. That is this one, the auto rotate. So if you're up here, you just type in auto rotate, and you click the down arrow, you'll find that command. You don't even have to go to Sketch. You just start typing in the word, and it'll come down, and you'll see what that option is. So anything that's called auto, or has the word auto in it, you just click the down arrow, and it'll sort through all the settings until you find that one, and it's the first one. I snapped this on because it's just that one last thing that I don't have to worry about. Most people don't typically sketch in 3D. The first thing they do is they go into a sketch. What do? They smack normal to. Why? Just have it do that every time, and you won't even think about it. Now, this one, enable on-screen numeric input on entity creation. That is just a really long sentence for this. Turn these two things on, and you'll instantly see the value. How many of you draw something and then smart dimension? What if I just want to dimension it from the outright? 5, enter. Same thing with rectangles. Now rectangles have 2 dimensions. 2, enter, 5, enter. This is what on-screen numeric does. For a circle, 5, enter. Huge time saver. Now, let's say you're doing a line. And you're going up. You say, I want to go 4, sure. But I don't want to dimension that, and I want to come over. You just click. So the first part of that setting command will bring you to the enable on screen. So if you go up here and you just type in enable on, those are the words you'll search for, and you'll just click the down arrow until you see this on-screen numeric. It'll be on the sketch tab. So you just hit the down arrow until you find it. These two one another. Because if you only check on the one, if that second one isn't checked where it says create dimension only when value is entered, well guess what? It's going to make you smart dimension every single thing you click on. And that's annoying. You don't want that. But you do want the ability to choose when you want to smart dimension each one. If you're not using that, absolutely turn this on. You will forget that you need to use smart dimension at that point. You'll only grab dimensions for really odd things. But if you're dimensioning circles, lines, anything, this is really fast. How many of you use mouse gestures by a show of hands? Okay, a lot more people use that. So I don't use Smart Dimension as much. I use it only about half the time as much because it's on my up swipe on my mouse gesture. So I'm going to do that really slowly, holding in my right mouse button, since only half the people know about this. As you move up, you can swipe to the left, and it only triggers once your mouse touches that button. But you can hold your right mouse button and get into and out of commands. So if you see me zipping through Smart Dimensions and things like that, and you can't tell what I'm doing, that's how I'm doing that. And my mouse has two buttons on the side. One of them is the S key, and one of them is the escape key. So you can see that quite often on my workflows. So that enable on-screen numeric input, the auto-rotate view, those are the things that I take for granted when I have my SOLIDWORKS installed for the first time or I'm doing a new installation. I usually just go in and check those three boxes first and foremost. The next one is one that I'm still surprised people don't know about, and it's an extremely useful way to sketch. Typically, folks who started on AutoCAD don't know about this, and if you're trying to draw complex curvatures or parts that have lots of arcs and circles in their geometry, this is where this command will really take over. And it's not even really that much of a command in just that it's built into the line command. So I'm going to start drawing a line. And the next thing I'm going to do is called the line to arc shortcut. So we know that if I single click again, it'll drop the line. Now, raise your hand if you didn't know that you can do this, but you can come back and rotate out and go straight into an arc. So a couple folks didn't know about that one. How much time did I just save you creating extra circles and trimming just by knowing that exists now? Now, let's go even deeper. You can control this by rotating your mouse. So if you rotate out and go clockwise, it'll go this way. Go counterclockwise, this way. As long as you go back to the center, you can really create any arc you want. You can even go arc on top of arc. You just have to come back to it. This allows you to make all those crazy geometries that you absolutely hate quickly. And it does add tangency while you go on the fly there. If you're drawing and you do it on accident, most people discover this on accident if they know about it. You're lying if you knew about it without discovering it on accident. Let's say you accidentally do it, right? And you're like, I don't want that. You hit escape, you hit cancel, you jump out of the sketch command. But if you right-click and hit switch to line, it goes back to line. So that command, even if you trigger it on accident, just right-click and it'll snap you back to line, which you meant to do. Sometimes if your mouse is on a slipping podium, right, like this one, like it's got a little bit of a slant to it, you're a little wonky on the mouse, you can control that with this, and you can always go back. You can control tangency and you can control arc control. You just have to listen and watch your mouse feedback as you do it. There's one other thing that I'm still surprised many users don't know about, and that is the shaded sketch contours. Now, if you're on the origin, your results will vary, but if you have this shaded sketch contours button on, which is on the toolbar by default, you can slide and move stuff around. Obviously, if it's anchored to something, be careful doing that. But let's say you have something out here and it has a closed profile. You can just grab that profile, move it around, and it won't blow up on you. That is, as long as it's not tied to anything. Obviously, if I tie this to this point and I stretch this around, it's going to blow up my sketch just like you would think. So that's another one that I find people need to know. So those are two very simple yet very powerful tricks for manipulating your sketches and just drawing in general. If you didn't know about that, that alone will speed you up. The next one I'm going to show you guys is one that is not on any toolbar by default at all. And you need to have this on your toolbar, or you need to have this even on your S key if you don't know about it. It's called dynamic mirror entities. So I'm going to just delete all this stuff here. And then it starts with a center line. So I come up, I drop a simple center line on the origin. Now, It's not on your toolbar by default, so where is it? I don't know. Hit your S key, type in the word dynamic. Now the S key will also let you take a command and drag it and drop it on the toolbar. You'll notice that mine is actually already up here, but if you just left click that and drag it, you can put it anywhere you want. And you can customize your toolbar. So I have dynamic sitting there already, so I'm not going to add it again. But once I have that on my toolbar, I'll just click Dynamic Mirror Entities, and it asks me, please select a sketch line or linear model edge to mirror about. And you'll have to watch this, but when you turn it on, you'll see these two little hash marks on the line that you click, or the edge. That means it is on. Now, this is different than just a mirror command where you sketch a bunch of stuff and then you flip it over to the other side. No, 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 no. This is way better. Watch. As you draw a line, it follows you around the other side. If you're making symmetric parts, there is only one way to do it now, right? You don't have to do all of it and think about it and then mirror it. Nah, let's not do that anymore. Let's use this. And here's the trick. It also adds a symmetry command. So if I do a circle, oh yes, I can add holes. It does it with any geometry. Any geometry. And it stays on until you turn it off. So it's a toggle command. So right now, I have it checked on. If I check it off, then I go back to the state I was at before. That is such a simple button, a simple way to use it, and a simple command. You have to know about that one. So Dynamic Mirror Entities is the name of that command. That is one I use all the time for all the obvious reasons. It does. So when you dimension across something, it keeps a symmetric relation across everything. So if I were to dimension this across the line, it will reflect across the line like a centerline smart dimension would. And it will change both sides. So yes, you can continue to smart dimension and use all the other tools just like you would expect. It is a toggle, right? So you have to start with a center line. You have to select that center line and toggle it on. It doesn't remember the center line for the next time you use it. So if you toggle it back on, you have to select a center line or the edge of a part. It'll do both. So if you're on an actual part edge, you can still use that for that reference. Just be careful as you reference model edges for a symmetric relation, for obvious reasons.
Can you select that same center line to the top of that?
Yes, you can use the same center line over and over again. You take it off and you're like, oh, you know what, I forgot to add something. You can toggle it back on and it'll activate that command. So it goes through just a plow of commands of symmetry as you do that. It also puts all the symmetric relations on the points for the circles, and then you'll see them stack up here on the center line. Very, very powerful command. So I like to call this one, not mirror entity, it's the other one, the good one, right? This is the good mirror. This is the one that you want. How many folks use AutoCAD in the room? How many of you have ever tried to copy a sketch from AutoCAD into SOLIDWORKS? How many of you threw your hands up in defeat because it was not fun? All right, let me show you another command, not on the toolbar. Not on the toolbar by default. Everybody knows move, everybody knows rotate. Most people don't know about modify sketch. So let's say you have a really wild shape. Making it up as I go along, guys. And let's say you copied and pasted this from AutoCAD. Well, when you copy in a sketch from AutoCAD, it has no intelligence whatsoever, right? It's just a bunch of lines and arcs, which means to manipulate that sketch, you often have to do a lot of things. Again, using that S key if you want, you can find the modify sketch command. The key is to watch my mouse and watch where I click. So it puts this little dumbbell shape down inside of the model somewhere. So if I want to rotate or move, I can left click and I can move this around. That is if you want to move the origin from that sketch. I don't want to do that, but if you need to, there's a tool for that that allows you to translate via the origin. there are uses. The other thing you might want to do is rotate. Now this rotate using the right-click mouse button here, this allows me to rotate based on degrees, but without messing with any of the other relations in the sketch. This rotates the entirety of the sketch, no matter what relations and things you have in it. Rotate, a lot of times you try to do that, and it blows it up. Now, let's talk about this other thing here called factor. Let's say you drag something in from AutoCAD, and then you realize, oh man, it was in metric, so now I have to somehow redo this whole thing, right? Well, if you scale it by 2.54, now it's in inches. So this also acts as a scale command to top it all off. I still haven't finished the awesome part of this. If you guys click this dumbbell on the right mouse button, if I click this, it'll also invert the sketch if you're doing opposite hand components. Let's say you draw something, it's really complicated, and you're like, you know, the first part of it is great, but now I need to do the opposite hand part, and I need to start with a sketch. Or you need to start with a part that's a little bit the same, but different, but inverted. You can copy the sketch in there, and then use this to flip it. And this doesn't blow up anything, right? You can have relations, you could have nothing. I'm purposely doing it with nothing to show you what it does. But you can flip this about that based on these dumbbell axes.
I've done that only because I copied it from somewhere else, and we copied it onto that plate, and it flipped it.
Yep.
So now I don't crap, I can go back.
So yes, let's say you start with something on, like, say, the right plane, and then you want to copy to the front plane, and it decided, the closest thing was this. You can use modify to fix it. Sometimes when you copy and paste a feature, it doesn't always come out the way you want on the sketch, and the thing might be inverted or something. This is absolutely the tool I use every time to fix that. It's called modify sketch. So you can move, you can rotate, and you can scale without blowing everything up. And this is probably the #1 command I use when I am copying stuff from AutoCAD and DraftSight. So if you're copying stuff from a 2D CAD environment or from another sketch or from another part and you're just trying to paste it in quickly, I definitely use the modify sketch. You can grab shaded profiles and you can drag it around. That's even better than move because that means you don't have to, control select everything. If you use move and it doesn't come out right, then you're sitting there trying to, wrestle it and it doesn't always work out the best. This one. I'm going to probably wow a couple of people if you haven't seen this one. Display delete relations in conjunction with a fully defined sketch. Now, let's take an example that many of you have probably seen before. I'm going to create a new part. Get out a modify sketch there. Let's say I insert a new component here, and I select the side of this part. If I select that face, and I do a convert entities to translate that geometry, and then I do an extrude. We call this an in-context part, right? It hasn't been saved out. It's based off of the geometry of the previous part, and now it's there, and it exists. But it only exists virtually inside of this component. If you've ever gotten an assembly from someone, you opened up one of their parts, and then you go into that sketch, and then you see nothing but external references. You probably sit there and go, ugh, because that means you can't change anything, right? Your only recourse is to deal with it or delete all the relations. And often enough, if you get a component from another CAD system and you're trying to reverse engineer it, then you do the feature works and you try to rebuild it in SOLIDWORKS, it comes in, then the origin is always in some dumb place that doesn't make any sense, right? So what do you do about it? Well, if you get an externally referenced part and you want to make it not externally referenced anymore, and don't get me wrong, externally referenced parts are amazing for just doing really quick scratch design. But eventually, you want to put that into production, and you don't want to send parts like this to production, because the next guy that opens this is just going to cry. So once you're done doing the engineering portion, and you have all these external references, your job is really to strip these out. And it's actually quite simple. You take your feature as it's rebuilt, you'll go in and go to Display Delete Relations up at the top, and just delete them all. Now that terrifies most people, Like just deleting them all. Now this, if I even touch one of those lines, we all know what's going to happen. Spaghetti, right? Well, again, with these profiles, this sketch, you can move some of this stuff around. You still do have move entities. Like we can at least move it from point A to B and get it on the origin, right? That's a great start. I know that I have to start smart dimensioning and adding relations because none of that exists in there. Okay, so you've gotten at this part. You've got it on the origin. The ugly part that's going to take you an hour is now next, right? No, we're not going to take an hour. Of course, there's an easy button, as I like to call it. Well, once you have an underdefined sketch, that means you have a lack of a fully defined sketch. And I can look down here at the bottom right corner and it says, yep, underdefined. So if I go to the fully defined sketch button, use this carefully, but if you can imagine what ordinate system that you want for your dimensions, you could do chain, baseline, or ordinate. I'm just going to do baseline for my dimensions, and I'm going to set it to the origin for both of these points. So I have two baseline dimensions, and I'm setting it to the origin. That's going to mean that I'm going to dimension to all of these different components, and I'm going to snap it from the origin so that I know where the measurements are being taken from. Of course, you can pick any point on the sketch. It doesn't really matter. And then if you have relations checked on, if you hit calculate, it does it for you. And even if the dimensions aren't right, you can change them as long as you hit OK. I just took a mess and made a part. And I mean it was a mess. I don't think I can find an uglier part than that in the next 2 minutes. But there's no straight edges on that part, and it still did it, and it's fully defined. And so now, do my Control Q, and it's there. And I don't have any more external references. Now, of course, when I go back to that assembly, it's going to be shifted, right, because I moved it from the origin. Well, now that those references are gone, I can just mate the part as it's supposed to be to begin with, and then I can continue along my way. So this workflow for creating externally referenced parts, like if you're just trying to trace a part off of something that already exists, but you're afraid of external references, you can still use external references, just use this tool, use this trick, and then you can back out of it and make an actual part that you can engineer.
Is there a way that instead of fully defining it, usually I spend time making everything tangent again and horizontal. Is there something just to add those relations back to the dumb sketch?
Yes. So during that fully defined sketch phase, let me go back a few steps. I'll just Control Z it so you can see it. So the question was, can you choose which ones? Yes, you can select specific ones to add, and you don't have to put dimensions at all. You can actually do this in conjunction until you get all of these. You could select all entities in the sketch or some. So in this case, if you want to just say tangency and a couple of other things, you can add just those at the same time.
But when you fully define it with the dimensions, it automatically does all that.
Yes. And you get to choose which settings and which ones get to be applied. Alrighty. Going to my next one here. So I call that the easy button. Fully defined sketch. You've got a mess. This is imperative for use when you draw splines. Another question?
Would it make that dimension it in a way that somebody normal would actually dimension it?
You can do ordinate dimensions because everyone dimensions a bit differently.
Well, I mean, most people are going to find angles, not edges or theoretical sharps like that. If someone's drawing something, they're going to know it's on 45. They're not
Right.
going to dimension it like that.
In cases like this, I would take some of my extraneous dimensions and I would delete them because this gets you 100% of the way.
Right.
But if you're seeing dimensions that you need for reference, those would be reference dimensions as opposed to feature dimensions. So you can get to a fully defined state without that reference dimension, but obviously if we're trying to machine that, right, we need that reference dimension to tell somebody how to fabricate it. So you would then, add that as a reference dimension in the drawing. If you want that to be a driven feature, you could delete some of these relations and then add that in. So you start with the majority of them in there. The things like horizontal and equal, those are the things we really want first, right? Because we always add relations before dimensions. So you could delete, say, a bulk of these dimensions and then change and add the ones that you want to redrive it in a different way. Did that answer?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, just when you're drawing something, you normally, if you want a 30-degree angle, you're going to dimension it as 30 degrees.
Right.
you're going to dimension it as half the height versus the width.
Right.
You know, you're going to dimension 30 degrees, and then you're going to dimension one leg of the triangle.
And in this case, there was a fillet on both sides, so there were no reference sketches, right? Because I had just a face to begin. So yeah, use this tool as you guys see fit. I do like this. It's called, what I say, the easy button when I'm using this.
I've got a question for you, Robbie.
Yes, James.
So you showed us the dynamic mirror.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to create a center line and then copy a sketch from somewhere else and bring it in after having set dynamic mirror on, would it automatically take that sketch and not mirror it across the
If the sketch existed before you copied it and placed it, yes. It won't keep dynamic mirror on, but it will keep the relations if you copied it. Then you could just move the sketch with all the relations on. If it has relations and you copy the sketch, it stays. The question was, if you copy a sketch with a sketch that's been created with dynamic mirror entity, or
copy sketch, when you start a new file, a new drawing, put your center line in, set up the dynamic mirror, then copy the sketch and import it in and establish it on that center line. Would that dynamic mirror then reflect that same sketch?
so if you started a net new sketch, and then you had another sketch that had dynamic mirror being used, and then you copied it over. Was that the question?
In your new sketch, you turn on dynamic mirror,
Uh-huh.
and then you copy and paste in, does it still dynamic mirror?
I haven't tried that one yet. If I have some time at the end, I'll try it though. I'm always willing to try it, just so everybody will know. The next one I have for you guys is Power Trim. Power Trim is the only trim tool I use. There are 4 trim tools inside of SOLIDWORKS. So if I create something with trim here, just some geometry, hit my S key and I go into trim, I know that there's a corner trim, I know there's trim away inside, I know there's outside, and I know there's trim the closest. I only use power trim because it literally does all of those things. If you trim from outside in, it does that trim the closest. It does that corner trim. But what many people don't know, let's say I'm trimming like this. Well, if you're holding in the left mouse button like I am, you guys see that red dot on my screen? Well, this trim allows you, if you accidentally do something, to do this thing I call red dot reverse. So if you're in here and you're doing a trim and you're going nuts, well, if you accidentally go too far, you can see the path that you used to trim, and if you go back to that red dot, you can put items back in there. And it's pretty nice. So you just hold down left click and you slam through the line and it'll get rid of it. But it's the only trim command that'll let you undo without having to undo and get out of the trim command. And you're in the trim command the entire time. So that means you could go forward and backwards as long as that mouse button is held down. And it's simple. It's just subtle. It's very subtle. Now, once you lift off the mouse button, there's no reverse. You're there. You can't do it. Just like if I start again and try again, that other red dot from when I was over here, it's not there. So I do use power trim pretty much exclusively. That is the only trim I use. It's the only trim I need. It can do inside. It's smart. It will do inside. It will do outside. It'll do trim the closest. If you need a corner out of this, need to be in my trim command for that. If you need a corner out of this, just bap through both of those lines. It'll do outside. It'll do inside. It'll do whatever you want it to do. But I pretty much just use that. That's my trim command. And in my book, there's no other trim command that has paralleled this. I only use that one. It's quite simple. That red dot is something that most people don't know about power trim.
You can connect lines together too.
Say again?
You can connect 2 lines together.
With trim? With the... Oh, yes, holding shift, you can extend the line too. So let's say you have a line here, hold shift. I extended that line out that way. It went to my near sketch entity there. But yeah, that's another one in there too, holding shift. Five? Perfect. I'm going to show you guys what I believe is probably one of the most powerful ones here. I'm going to just go around the room real quick and just show me with a show of hands. How long would it take you to model this weldment? If I handed it to you for the first time and I said, I want you to model this in a 3D sketch, how long would it take you? Show of hands, how many people would say hours? A couple. An hour? Who could do it in an hour or less? Who could do it in half an hour? Okay, who could do this in 5 minutes? You get 10 to 15? What if I told you it actually takes longer to create the weldment profile groups than it does to make the 3D sketch for this? Let's take a look at this. Now, that is obviously a very intimidating shape, right? Everyone can appreciate that this thing has a lot going on. But if I told you that you could start with this, I think most of you in the room could probably draw that in 2 to 5 minutes, right? There's 3 boss extrudes in there and a fillet. Everyone here could easily draw this, right? That is the shape or the base shape of that weldment. So most people are very intimidated by 3D sketches, and I'll help you eliminate that fear today. So let's say I create this body, and then I start a 3D sketch. Now, if you trace the outside of the weldment with the features, if you hit your E key for edges, that's using a filter. If anyone has ever accidentally turned on this pink funnel before and tried to figure out why I can't click on faces and got really frustrated and uninstalled and reinstalled SOLIDWORKS because you thought it was a glitch, it's just a filter. It has happened many times. But my E is for edge filter. So now that I'm in a 3D sketch, if I hit Control A to select all my edges and then convert entities, now I'm not terrified of that 3D sketch at all. Not one bit. Then, what I would do then, right, because I have this body in here, is that I would simply do that delete body command and remove that body, and now I'm left with just a 3D sketch that is controlled by a body that doesn't exist, but it also has driving dimensions, which means I can change everything about this, and it updates all my weldment profiles and everything to go along with that. And then, of course, you can simply go back and pick all of your weldment groups. So I will fast forward to the point where I just have that sketch, which is now visible, and you can see it. So after that delete body command, you're there. That means you just need to draw some feature and do that command, and then you can add your weldment group all in one command. And I'll highlight my group so you guys can see the methodology behind this. But there's group 1 highlighted in yellow. There's group 2, group 3. You just click your weldment commands just like you normally would. And you are going to have to click them in the order of which you want the tubes to be coped, and you're going to have to use all of your best practices and techniques there. Now, you can also do the same thing with a perfect 2D sketch and do a surface extrude. As long as you have edges, you can do it. As long as you have edges, you can do that command, you can get that 3D sketch, and you can start. Now, there are some members in here that you can draw along with that 3D sketch, right? So if I go into my 3D sketch and I modify that, right, we've got a couple of members in here that are off in different directions. So as you guys are drawing in a 3D sketch, let's say I want to go off the center point. The trick with 3D sketching is just to use the tab command to change the direction that you wish to go. And as long as you're paying attention to which axis you're drawing in, comparing the axes down here to the relations and axes that are on your mouse tooltips, you guys can make any 3D sketch. But it is much faster to start with a body. Much faster.
So for people that don't know, to switch to 4-view here, isometric and 4-view on the screen, that way you can see your directions if you're working on something really complex.
Yes.
If you move the mouse to that quadrant, it changes automatically.
Oh, which one?
If you show multiple views, windows on the screen from top view, front view, right view.
Oh, yeah.
As you move the mouse to each view, whatever view you're sketching in, you're staying on that plane, X, Y, or Z.
So there's a lot of methodologies to working with a lot of these, and I hope that this at least speeds you guys up on really complex 3D sketches. This is something that people call me and ask me questions about all the time. It's probably one of like the #1 things for folks doing structures that I see. They're like, yeah, how do I do this? There's a lot of NASCAR teams here in Charlotte, and they ask, like, weldments and doing frames, it is one of the hardest things. Like, do you have any tricks? And I'm like, well, do you know about this one? And usually this is the one that gets people going. So, the steps. Draw a body. Start your 3D sketch. You hit your E key for edge filters. Then you do a Control A to select all. You hit your Convert Entities command, and that will give you your sketch. You exit that sketch, delete the body, and now you're starting with a brand new, fresh 3D sketch ready to go for your frame. And there is a video of this on our YouTube channel called Wicked Fast Weldments, because it is wicked fast.